Hey guys, tonight we're going somewhere far older than any street you've ever walked. Somewhere between the slow-flowing Tigris and Euphrates, where the air hums with heat and the scent of baked clay. You're about to wander the quiet lanes of an ancient Mesopotamian city, maybe maybe Lagash, names whispered through 5,000 years of dust. You'll feel the crunch of sun-hardened earth beneath your sandals, hear the distant call of a merchant closing his stall, and catch the smoky aroma of barley bread cooling on a roof. And don't worry, you probably wouldn't survive here long. The air's thick with grit, the water's questionable, and the neighbors gossip more efficiently than any modern group chat. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Tell me where you're listening from and what time it is where you are. I love seeing this little map of sleepy travelers around the world. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You stand still for a moment, breathing in the warm night. The moonlight falls softly across rows of squat mud brick homes, each one the color of baked bread, each doorway just a little smaller than you expect. The streets twist like lazy rivers, uneven and unplanned. They're not grand avenues, more like shared footpaths where chickens wander freely and clay shards crunch underfoot. A stray dog trots by, tail wagging in that half-hopeful way dogs have had since forever. Somewhere behind you, a woman laughs, a short, tired laugh. Then the sound of a pot breaking, followed by a sigh. Everyday life, 2000 BCE. You walk forward slowly, taking in the details that no textbook ever quite captures. The city smells of everything: clay, grain, smoke, goats, and the faint metallic tang of the nearby river. The walls on either side rise chest high, patched with straw and coated in fresh plaster. People here build their homes out of the same soil they stand on, a kind of earthy recycling system. When walls crumble, they mix the pieces back into new bricks. Historians still argue whether that's sustainability or just necessity, but in Mesopotamia, the line between the two was always blurred. A boy runs past, barefoot, carrying a jug of water from the public well. His tunic's little more than a linen wrap, and his skin glistens with sweat. The well sits in the middle of a small square up ahead, surrounded by gossiping elders who pretend they're not gossiping. One scratches a cuneiform tablet with a reed stylus, noting something that might be trade records or maybe just the ancient equivalent of neighborhood drama. Archaeologists have found plenty of these small clay tablets, and not all of them are grand epics or royal decrees. Some just record Lent barley or arguments over walls. Bureaucracy, it turns out, is one of humanity's oldest lullabies. You pass a cluster of tiny shops tucked into the street, if you can call them shops, more like shaded alcoves in the front of people's homes, where merchants sell everything from fish to reeds. The air buzzes with low conversation, the kind that slows down as the evening deepens. You notice that there's no real separation between work and home here. The merchant's family lives just behind the stall, children playing underfoot as he measures out barley. Privacy, as we understand it, hasn't quite been invented yet. The houses press close together, shoulder to shoulder, like weary friends. Their walls lean slightly, as though each one's holding the next upright. And they're not uniform. No two houses are exactly alike. Archaeologists have noticed this in excavations at and Nippur. Mesopotamian streets curve organically, houses squeezed into whatever space the neighbors left. Planning codes? None. You'd be lucky to find room for a door to open fully. But there's a certain warmth in that chaos. You can almost feel the heartbeat of a community packed together, where every cough and laugh travels easily through the walls. You step carefully around a shallow gutter that runs down the center of the lane. It's not glamorous. It carries runoff, gray water, and occasionally worse. The smell makes you wrinkle your nose, but it's part of the city's rhythm. Rain's rare, but when it comes, these narrow channels keep the streets from flooding. Early urban engineering, functional, if not fragrant. The sky above is a velvet dark now, speckled with stars that feel almost too close. You tilt your head back and spot a faint line of light, Venus maybe. The same star someone here might have whispered a wish to 4,000 years ago. One of the oldest surviving astronomical records comes from this region after all. The Babylonians mapped the heavens in clay. Historians still argue whether they did it out of wonder or just to predict when to plant crops. Maybe both. Humans have always looked up when the world below felt uncertain. You pause beside one of the larger houses, marked by a more polished entry and thicker walls. A merchant's home, perhaps. The doorway's low, no grand arches here. You have to duck to peek inside, and what you glimpse is modest but organized. The faint glow of an oil lamp flickers against smooth clay. Inside, you imagine a family finishing dinner. Flatbread, onions, dates. Maybe a goat stew if they're lucky. A woman wipes her hands on her tunic, shushing a sleepy child. Somewhere, a clay jar creaks as it cools, releasing the softest crack. You feel oddly intrusive, like a time-traveling neighbor lingering too long. A small detail catches your eye. Symbols scratched lightly above the doorway. Protective signs, maybe invoking a household god. Archaeologists sometimes find tiny clay plaques with figures of spirits meant to ward off illness or bad luck. They're not elaborate, just little handmade guardians pressed into the walls. Religion in Mesopotamia wasn't separate from life. It was part of the architecture. Even a simple threshold had meaning. Step through, and you weren't just entering a home. You were crossing into a small, sacred space. You run your fingers over the wall's surface. The texture's surprisingly soft, powdery from centuries of dust. You can almost feel the fingerprints of whoever built it. Ordinary people mixing mud and straw, layering brick upon brick under the relentless sun. There's a quiet dignity in that simplicity. These homes didn't reach for the sky like ziggurats. They settled into the earth, content to last a few generations before melting back down again. You take another step, hearing the soft crunch of ancient dust beneath your feet, and imagine what this street sounded like in daylight. Vendors shouting, children laughing, goats complaining, potters hammering clay. Now, though, it's hushed, as if the whole city has collectively exhaled. There's a strange peace in the decay of it all. These walls once echoed with the noise of daily life, and now they whisper faintly under the moonlight. Every crumble and crack tells a story you can't quite read, but you can sense it, the pulse of something ancient, ordinary, and deeply human. You stop again, letting your eyes adjust to the dimness. Somewhere far off, a temple bell rings, low and hollow. Maybe it's for the moon god Nana, patron of The sound carries over the rooftops, soft and resonant. You think about how every person in this city, from the potter to the priest, lived within earshot of that sound. It was both comfort and control, a reminder of divine order amid the muddy streets. A cool breeze brushes past, carrying with it the faint scent of reeds from the river. You close your eyes and let the city breathe around you. The walls, the silence, the warmth, they blend together until you almost forget where or when you are. And somewhere, behind one of these walls, a child turns in their sleep. A dog sighs. A lamp sputters out. The city of settles into night, unaware that one day it will be rediscovered under layers of sand and time. You stand before one of those narrow doorways now, the kind that almost seems to frown at you. A rectangle of shadow just wide enough for one person to slip through sideways. You hesitate, because from the outside, there's nothing welcoming about it. No decoration, no painted lintel, no inviting porch swing. Just a modest entry cut into sun-baked mud brick. Still, this is where every Mesopotamian day begins and ends, the humble threshold. You duck your head and step inside. Instantly, the air changes. The heat and noise of the street fade, replaced by a cool stillness,
that smells faintly of clay, ash, and something herbal, maybe crushed reeds or stored grain. Your eyes take a moment to adjust to the dimness. There are no glass windows here, no bright openings. The entryway is intentionally narrow and dark, a buffer between the dusty world outside and the intimate space of the home.
The doorway is low for a reason. It forces anyone entering, friend, neighbor, or nosy trader, to bow slightly, a subtle reminder of respect. And if you're wondering about doors, yes, there are doors, sort of. A slab of wood or woven reed mat serves the purpose, though true timber is rare and expensive here. In fact, historians still argue whether ordinary homes used full wooden doors or hung reed curtains instead. The evidence is sketchy, since reeds and wood rot away long before archaeologists can dig them up. Either way, privacy was relative, more about shadows than silence. You take another slow step forward, and your feet sink into the packed earth floor, cool and uneven. The walls rise close on both sides, plastered smooth and painted in faded whitewash. You can see the fingerprints of the people who built them, pressed into the clay centuries ago. You imagine a family smoothing the wall together, someone humming, a child giggling, a neighbor leaning in through the doorway to offer gossip or advice. Construction here wasn't just labor, it was community choreography. The entry hall isn't big, barely enough space for two people to pass, but it serves an important purpose. It shields the private life of the family from the public gaze. In this world, the street is full of eyes and ears. Every pot dropped, every argument overheard becomes neighborhood conversation by sunset. This little hallway, dark and plain, is a soft border where the noise stops. You almost feel it as you stand there, like crossing from the modern world into silence. There's a small niche in the wall to your left, a shallow dip holding a clay oil lamp. It flickers gently, its flame tiny but steady. That light would have been precious, the heart of evening. Lamps were made from baked clay, pinched into shallow bowls with a spout for the wick. Olive oil or sesame oil fed the flame. Archaeologists have found countless of them, each one a little different, some plain, some with simple patterns etched into the rim. They weren't just practical, they were comfort in a world without electricity or streetlights. The lamp's light glows over a faint symbol scratched above it, two curved lines that might represent protection or good fortune. The Mesopotamians loved their symbols. They believed the home, humble as it might be, needed defense against invisible forces, disease, envy, spirits that slip through cracks in the wall. Some homes even had small figurines buried beneath the threshold, miniature gods or heroic spirits meant to keep danger out. You probably stepped over one without noticing. Don't worry, they're friendly, mostly. To your right, you notice a small bench built right into the wall, a lump of clay shaped smooth, used for sitting, storing jars, or placing sandals. It's hard to tell. Every surface in here multitasks. Space is too precious for extravagance. A jar might serve as both water storage and a place to sit. A mat might double as a bed and dining area. This is efficiency born not from minimalism, but from necessity. You can almost hear the muffled sounds of the household beyond this hallway, the faint clink of pottery, a low murmur of voices, a child humming a tune. Somewhere deeper in the house, a goat snorts softly. Animals were often part of the domestic ecosystem here. Small courtyards and back rooms sometimes sheltered goats or chickens, especially at night. It was practical and probably smelled like, well, exactly what you're imagining. You brush your hand along the cool plaster. It's smooth but slightly damp, the way clay always is in warm air. In places, the wall is repaired with newer mud, a patchwork of generations. You think about how often families must have renewed these walls after floods, heat, or time wore them down. Mesopotamian homes weren't meant to last centuries. They were meant to breathe, crumble, and be rebuilt. Some houses were even rebuilt atop their own ruins again and again, forming small mounds over generations.
The city of for instance, literally grew upward this way. Every rebuild was an act of quiet resilience.
You glance back toward the street. From this dim space, the outside world looks brighter than it really is, a glowing slit of dusty orange. Someone walks by and pauses, casting a shadow across the doorway. They hesitate, then move on. You realize that even a few steps inside, you've already disappeared from view. Privacy achieved.
There's something poetic about this threshold. It's the line between chaos and calm, gossip and quiet, survival and sanctuary. In modern terms, it's like the do not disturb sign of ancient times, except it's made of baked mud and cultural instinct. People respected thresholds here. Stepping into someone's home without permission wasn't just rude, it was spiritually risky. You never knew which household god you might offend. A cool draft slips through from the next room. The air smells faintly of smoke and roasted grain. You can picture what lies ahead. A small central courtyard, maybe open to the sky. But for now, you linger a moment longer in this dim entry space. The clay beneath your fingers, the flickering lamp, the hush, it all feels strangely intimate, as if you've stepped into someone's memory rather than their house. Historians still argue whether these homes had fixed ownership or were more communal, shifting between families as fortunes changed. Some evidence suggests that, in older parts of cities, families built additions wherever space allowed, sometimes swallowing part of a neighbor's wall, sometimes losing ground to one. Imagine that argument. Hey, you built your kitchen into my bedroom. Humanity hasn't changed much. A faint buzzing sound makes you look up. Mosquitoes. Yes, even 5,000 years ago, they were here, drifting lazily in the still air. You wave one away and make a mental note. No mosquito nets, no insect repellent, just long sleeves and endurance. One fringe detail archaeologists love to mention: some households burned aromatic reeds or bitumen as a kind of smoke defense. It probably helped a little and made everything smell faintly like asphalt. You shift your weight and hear a soft creak beneath your feet. The floor isn't wood, it's compacted earth, but it flexes slightly as if hollow. Some homes had small pits beneath the floor for storage or to keep valuables hidden. You imagine jars of barley sealed with clay lids, tucked away from rats and humidity. Maybe even a small clay tablet record, a household's receipts, debts, or prayers. Somewhere, a future archaeologist might find it and think, "Ah, yes, the daily life of ordinary people." You smile faintly. They'd be right. From deeper inside, a woman's voice calls softly, and for a second, it sounds as if she's calling you. You blink, realizing how easily your imagination has slipped into this place. Maybe that's the quiet magic of ancient homes. They blur the boundary between then and now. You're not an outsider peeking in. You're part of the rhythm, standing where countless feet once paused after long days. The lamp sputters slightly, sending a ripple of shadow across the wall. You take one last look at the doorway behind you, the world outside now just a faint glow. Then you turn toward the next room, where a faint wash of moonlight spills through an opening above. Somewhere ahead lies the heart of the home, the courtyard where life unfolds. But you'll get there in a moment. For now, take a breath in this narrow space. You feel the hush settle deeper, the walls leaning close as if they're listening. 1,000 years of quiet footsteps have passed through here, and tonight, for a fleeting moment, yours join them. You step out of the dim hallway and into a sudden wash of soft light. The air feels immediately wider, freer, as though the house itself exhales around you. Before you stretches the courtyard, the true heart of the Mesopotamian home. Everything important happens here: meals, gossip, prayers, chores, naps, and occasionally the quiet art of doing absolutely nothing. The first thing you notice is the sky. For the first time since entering, you can actually see it. The courtyard is open to the heavens, a square of light framed by high mud brick walls. During the day, sunlight pours down and warms the clay floor. At night, the stars shimmer overhead, mirrored faintly in the water jars below. There's a stillness here that feels ancient and familiar all at once, like standing in someone's memory of peace. The ground underfoot is packed earth, hard and smooth from generations of bare feet. In one corner, a large clay jar sits half buried in the soil, its rim sealed with a worn lid of reed. The faint scent of cool water rises from within. In another corner, an older woman kneels over a grinding stone, her movements steady and slow. She hums softly, and the rhythm of stone against grain feels almost hypnotic. You can hear each scrape echo faintly off the walls, like a metronome keeping time for the house. A small cat slinks by, brushing against your ankle. Its coat is dusty, eyes gleaming gold in the dim light. Cats have been here nearly as long as people, drawn by the promise of mice hiding in grain stores. One quirky tidbit historians love: cats weren't worshipped here like in Egypt, but they were deeply appreciated. They were unofficial pest control with soft paws and bad attitudes, a relationship not much different from today. You glance up. The walls rise about twice your height, smooth and slightly curved at the top where sunlight fades to shadow. They're plain but functional, plastered over with lime or clay to reflect heat. In richer homes, these walls might have been painted, simple whitewash, maybe faint patterns of ochre. But even in modest dwellings, this courtyard was where a family showed its pride. A swept floor, neatly stored jars, maybe a small reed mat for guests. These were signs of dignity, not wealth. In the center of the courtyard sits a low clay platform, its surface blackened from soot. It serves as a hearth when weather turns cool, or a simple table for preparing food. Around it, everyday tools lie scattered: a small bronze knife, a basket of onions, a broken pottery shard used as a scoop. Nothing here feels new. Everything is repaired, reused, reincarnated. Even pottery fragments, once broken, might serve as writing tablets for practice or household notes. Historians still argue whether most homes had a literate member or if scribes handled writing entirely for the upper classes. But a few scratched marks found on household pottery suggest some people did know how to record their own small stories. Maybe this courtyard once echoed with a parent teaching a child how to press a stylus into soft clay. A small bird hops along the edge of the roof above, chirping as if it owns the place. And, in a way, it does. Courtyards like this blurs a line between domestic life and nature. Sunlight, wind, rain all pass freely through. When it rains, and in southern Mesopotamia it doesn't happen often, the water falls straight into the courtyard, gathering in a small drain that channels it away. It's messy, but it works. You crouch down to look at the drain, just a simple clay pipe leading out beneath the wall. Early plumbing again, humble but effective. You can feel how this space ties everything together. Every doorway around you opens into another small room. The kitchen, sleeping quarters, storage spaces, all connected by this single open center. In modern terms, it's part living room, part backyard, part utility zone. During the day, the courtyard buzzes with life. At night, it quiets into a kind of soft domestic symphony. The creak of rope, the flicker of lamplight, a child murmuring in sleep. You sit for a moment on a raised ledge, letting your eyes adjust. In the fading light, you notice a small altar against one wall. It's not elaborate, just a lump of baked clay, shaped like a miniature step pyramid, with tiny impressions where offerings once sat. Maybe a few grains, maybe a piece of bread. Every home in Mesopotamia had its gods. Some families honored household deities, protectors of the door, the hearth, fertility, or good harvests. The large of temples might get all the glory, but the real spiritual life happened right here, where offerings met ordinary air. You reach out and brush a bit of dust off the altar's edge. It's smooth, cool, comforting in a strange way. You can almost imagine someone whispering a prayer over it, A quiet plea for rain or health, or just fewer scorpions this season. The people here didn't separate the divine from the daily. The gods were part of the routine, as familiar as the grinding stone or the water jar. A young girl appears from one of the side rooms, carrying a small bowl of lentils. She glances at you, curious, then sits cross-legged near the hearth. Her hands move automatically, sorting grains, plucking out stones. A sleepy cat flops down beside her, uninterested in theology or architecture. The girl hums the same tune as the woman earlier, perhaps her mother. Music, too, was part of life's rhythm. Small flutes made from reeds, simple drums, even hand claps, all echoed through these courtyards. If you listen closely enough, you can almost hear it. You lean back, feeling the last warmth of the day on your shoulders. The sun has shifted, casting long, slanted beams through the open roof. Dust dances in the light, turning the air golden. It's oddly beautiful, the same beauty you might find watching sunlight through a window at home, realizing time's moving slower than usual. Then, a small detail catches your eye. A handprint, faint but clear, pressed high on the wall near the altar. Maybe a child's hand, left there in drying plaster centuries ago. It's small, maybe 5 fingers long, the imprint of a moment now fossilized in clay. You can't help but smile. It's the same impulse kids have today, to leave proof they existed. Look, it says silently, I was here. Historians still debate what purpose courtyards like this truly served. Some argue they were mainly practical, for light and ventilation. Others insist they were the symbolic heart of family and spirit, a microcosm of the world itself, with sky above and earth below. Both might be true. The line between the sacred and the ordinary in ancient Mesopotamia was paper thin. The grinding has stopped. The older woman stretches her back and pours the milled grain into a jar. You watch as she covers it carefully with a cloth, then traces her finger over the rim, perhaps counting, perhaps blessing. She glances upward at the sky, muttering something that sounds like gratitude. It's easy to forget that this world, so ancient, so distant, was full of gestures just like that. Small, wordless acknowledgments that life, even in its simplest form, is a fragile miracle. The air cools slightly as twilight deepens. You notice that the courtyard catches every shift in temperature, every change in light. The mud brick walls radiate stored warmth, like soft embers. A bat swoops overhead, quick and silent. The girl lights a small lamp, placing it near the altar. Its flame dances lazily, turning the air amber. You sit quietly, breathing in the scent of oil, smoke, and clay. The city outside has dimmed. Only a faint hum remains. The world shrinks to this square of sky and earth, this small theater of family life, where history unfolded not in battles or decrees, but in dinners, chores, and laughter. A whisper of wind stirs through the open space. You close your eyes, hearing the walls creak faintly in reply. Somewhere, a pot cools and pops. The stars begin to appear one by one, like shy guests arriving late. And here you sit, somewhere in ancient Ur, feeling utterly at home. You take a slow breath and rise from the edge of the courtyard, feeling the packed earth still warm beneath your feet. Around you, small doorways lead into shadowed rooms, each one promising a different rhythm of daily life. You turn toward the nearest opening, its entrance draped with a curtain woven from reeds. The air beyond looks darker, cooler, a welcome retreat from the fading heat outside. You push the curtain aside and step inside. Instantly, you're surrounded by a still, heavy quiet. The light drops to a soft brown haze, filtering in from the courtyard behind you. The room is small, barely larger than a modern bedroom, and windowless. Most Mesopotamian homes didn't have outside windows. The reason was practical. Windows let in dust, heat, And, perhaps worst of all, gossip. In cities where houses stood shoulder to shoulder, privacy meant solid walls and silence. The air smells faintly of dry reeds and oil. You can make out the faint outline of a sleeping mat against one wall, woven rushes layered with a few folded textiles. Pillows, if they existed at all, were firm bundles of cloth, sometimes stuffed with straw. Not exactly luxurious, but better than the bare earth. Beside the mat, a small clay jar sits half buried in the floor, sealed with a piece of linen. Probably grain or water, or maybe dates, things worth keeping close at hand. This room is both bedroom and storage space depending on the hour. In the morning, mats roll up and the area becomes a workspace. In the evening, the family spreads them back out again. Furniture, in the sense you know it, is almost non-existent. A low stool here, a chest there. The walls themselves are shelves, built with thick plaster ledges that hold lamps, bowls, and small keepsakes. Everything is deliberate. Every inch of space matters. A faint buzzing sound reaches your ears, a fly trapped somewhere near the ceiling. The air is still enough to hear your own breathing. You crouch down and run your fingers across the floor. It's smooth but uneven, hard-packed earth layered with fine clay. Every step in this room has pressed another thin memory into the ground. Centuries later, archaeologists will sift through these floors and find pottery shards, ashes, and lost trinkets, the small debris of life that turns into data. Historians still argue whether it's right to call these homes crude. Crude, maybe, but hardly primitive. Everything here serves its purpose, beautifully and quietly.
You lean back against the wall. It's cool to the touch, thick enough to keep the day's heat outside. You can hear faint sounds through the clay. Someone talking softly in another room, a jug being set down, a goat snorting from the courtyard. Privacy, yes, but never isolation. The family's always near, just a few arm lengths away in any direction.
Your eyes adjust slowly. A niche in the far wall holds another clay lamp, unlit for now. Beside it, something small glimmers, a bead perhaps, or a pendant carved from shell. Mesopotamians loved adornment. Even modest families might keep a small hoard of jewelry. Beads of lapis lazuli from Afghanistan, shell from the Persian Gulf, copper trinkets from Oman. The trade networks were vast, linking this humble home to lands hundreds of miles away. It's humbling to think that something so simple, a bead lying in a quiet bedroom, traveled farther than most people of that era ever would.
You sit cross-legged on the mat, the woven reeds creaking softly beneath you. The air smells faintly of burnt sesame oil. You imagine what a night here would feel like, the courtyard cooling down, the city quieting, a family gathering before sleep. A mother might hum to her child, her voice echoing off the plaster walls. Someone might stretch out and whisper a prayer to a household god. Maybe an old man snores from the next room over, proof that even ancient history had its soundtrack of sleep.
There's a tiny opening high in the wall, a slit really, no wider than your hand. A faint glow seeps through, painting a thin stripe of light across the floor. It's a ventilation shaft, a clever trick to keep air flowing and smoke from collecting. Historians have long admired Mesopotamian builders for their practicality. Without glass, without metal vents, they created homes that breathed naturally, cool by day, warm by night. One quirky tidbit, in some excavated houses, archaeologists found that these tiny openings were carefully aligned to catch prevailing winds. Ancient air conditioning, powered by geometry and good luck.
You lie back on the mat for a moment. The ceiling above you is low, supported by wooden beams darkened with age and smoke. Timber was a luxury, imported from distant mountains, so beams were used sparingly and cherished like gold. Some beams still bear faint tool marks, rough but purposeful. You imagine a carpenter, barefoot, squinting against the sun, shaping it with a bronze adze, muttering about how expensive the wood is. The air grows thicker, heavier.
You close your eyes for a moment, letting your mind drift. The house hums softly, alive in its stillness. The faint creak of clay, the whisper of wind through the tiny vent, it's like the whole structure is breathing. There's something comforting about that, the idea that walls made from earth might have their own kind of heartbeat. You open your eyes again and glance toward the doorway. Through the reed curtain, you can see a faint shimmer of light from the courtyard, flickering like water. Someone's moving out there, maybe tending a fire, maybe checking the storage jars. The shadows play gently on the wall, and for a fleeting moment, you imagine them as echoes of long-gone hands, still going about their evening chores. There's a small shelf near your shoulder, and on it a handful of clay figurines, crude but expressive, tiny humans with big eyes and round bellies. These might be representations of fertility gods or ancestral spirits, though scholars still argue exactly what they meant. Some believe they were toys, others see them as devotional icons. Either way, they make the room feel watched over, not in a spooky way, more like a quiet reassurance. You're not alone, even here, thousands of years out of place. A faint scratching sound draws your attention. A mouse, probably. They were constant roommates in homes like this, slipping in through cracks to nibble on grain. But that's why cats stuck around, and why families kept jars sealed and floors swept. Hygiene wasn't perfect by modern standards, but it was mindful. People knew what spoiled food smelled like, and they took care to avoid it. After all, illness didn't come with antibiotics here, it came with prayers and herbal brews that may or may not have worked. You run your hand along the mat again. The reeds are warm, pliant. If you lived here, you'd probably find comfort in the simplicity of it. No clutter, no noise, no glowing screens. Just a mat, a wall, and the faint smell of bread cooling somewhere nearby. The body would rise with dawn and sleep not long after sunset. Time wasn't measured by alarms, but by light and shadow, hunger and rest. Outside, the faint sound of a donkey braying cuts through the quiet. Then silence again. The kind of silence that doesn't feel empty, just deeply full. You realize how these small rooms, dark, windowless, simple, held lives as rich as any modern home. Laughter, argument, dreams, the sound of rain tapping on the roof. The details have changed, but the essence hasn't. Home is still where you tuck yourself away from the world, where you build warmth out of nothing but walls and will. You stand up slowly, careful not to bump the low ceiling. One last glance at the small figures on the shelf, and you whisper a silent thank you to the family who once lived here, to the clay that remembers them, to the strange continuity that lets you stand in their space. As you push aside the reed curtain and step back into the courtyard, the air greets you again, soft and open. You blink against the light, suddenly aware of how alive this house feels, breathing through its courtyard, dreaming through its walls. Somewhere nearby, a woman's laughter rises, followed by the clatter of pots. Evening routines continue, just as they always have. And you? You're ready to explore the corner where all those sounds come from, the kitchen, the warmest and most fragrant part of the house. You follow the soft clatter of pottery and the unmistakable, cozy smell of food toward one of the smaller rooms that open off the courtyard. The light grows golden and smoky as you step closer, an unmistakable sign that you've found the heart of the home, the kitchen. It's not a kitchen the way you know it. No polished counters, no clinking metal pans, no humming refrigerator filled with leftovers and bottled drinks. This one is compact, alive, and primitive in the most endearing way. The walls are darkened with soot. The air hums faintly with the warmth of the clay oven built into the corner. And yes, it smells incredible. You duck slightly as you enter, the doorway lower than before. The first thing that greets you is a burst of aroma. Roasted barley, smoke, maybe a hint of goat cheese or herbs crushed in a mortar. You take another step and feel the heat radiating off the small clay oven, shaped like an upside-down bowl with a hole in the front. This is a tanur, the beating heart of every Mesopotamian household. Someone crouches beside it, an older woman, hair tied back with a strip of linen, her hands dusted with flour. She's shaping small discs of dough, slapping each one expertly onto the inner wall of the oven. The dough sticks for a moment, then puffs and browns in seconds, filling the room with the comforting smell of fresh bread. You can almost taste it, nutty, slightly smoky, warm enough to make your stomach rumble. It's fascinating how familiar this feels. Thousands of years later, people still cook flatbread this way across the Middle East and South Asia. Some culinary traditions barely blink at the passage of millennia. The only thing missing here might be a sprinkle of sesame seeds, and maybe the sound of your phone timer going off when the bread's done.
The woman hums softly as she works, a rhythm as natural as breathing. Each piece of dough is simple: flour, water, maybe a pinch of salt. Yeast isn't exactly a household staple yet, though some bakers accidentally invent it by letting dough sit too long in the heat. Historians still argue whether Mesopotamians understood fermentation or just stumbled into it. Either way, their bread works, and that's all that matters.
You glance around. The room is packed with quiet activity. A low bench along one wall holds a collection of jars, some open, some sealed with clay lids. Inside them are the treasures of daily life: barley, lentils, chickpeas, oil, dates, and dried herbs. Each jar tells a story of trade and ingenuity. Barley, the staple crop of the region, isn't just food, it's also currency, sometimes even wages. Workers in received barley rations as pay. Imagine earning your salary in soup ingredients.
A smaller jar nearby gives off a pungent, sweet smell. You peer inside and find thick syrup glistening in the low light. Date syrup, sila, the Mesopotamian sweetener of choice. No sugar, no honey needed, just boiled down dates turned into liquid gold. A spoonful of it drizzled over bread would be pure heaven. You resist the urge to try it, though it wouldn't be the strangest thing archaeologists have ever done near ancient food.
You step carefully around a small pile of ashes on the floor. There's no chimney here. Smoke just drifts upward and escapes through a vent or small hole in the roof. The effect is both beautiful and mildly suffocating. A haze of blue-gray light hangs in the air, catching on motes of flour. The walls are streaked with soot, each smudge a record of countless dinners cooked over decades. You crouch to look at the floor and notice something clever: a thin layer of ash mixed into the earth. It's not just waste, it's maintenance. Ash keeps the floor dry and absorbs odors. Every few days, someone probably sweeps it out and spreads a fresh layer. It's an ancient cleaning hack, and strangely enough, it works. Against the far wall sits a cluster of clay pots, some resting on low tripods. Inside one, a stew simmers slowly. The scent that rises is rich and earthy. Lentils, onions, garlic, and maybe goat meat if this family's fortunate today. You can see bubbles forming along the rim, hear the faint pop-pop as steam escapes through a crack in the lid. Cooking here isn't rushed. Everything takes time, fire, and patience. You imagine the rhythm of daily life around this space. Morning might begin with grinding grain, an exhausting task done on a heavy basalt quernstone, hour after hour. Archaeologists have even analyzed the bone structure of ancient women's arms and found evidence of the repetitive strain from grinding grain daily. It's domestic endurance turned into fossil record. You glance at the older woman tending the bread and think her arms could probably outlast a modern gym membership. Near the hearth, a child sits with a small clay bowl, mashing something that looks suspiciously like garlic and leeks. Mesopotamian recipes, yes, there were recipes, mention these ingredients often. In fact, one of the oldest known cookbooks on Earth comes from this region, written in cuneiform around 1700 BCE. The recipes, though hard to interpret, describe meat stews seasoned with herbs, beer, and onions. So, yes, your dinner tonight might not be so different from theirs, minus the clay dust seasoning. The child looks up and smiles shyly before returning to their task. A cat circles near their feet, hopeful but ignored. You take a slow breath and notice the layering of smells: the yeast, the smoke, the meat, the faint tang of fermenting grain. It's not unpleasant, it's lived in, alive. You trace your hand along a nearby wall, noticing faint reddish streaks. Someone smeared a paste of ochre and clay, maybe decorative, maybe just a byproduct of fixing cracks. Even here, in a utilitarian space, there's a quiet artistry. Humanity's impulse to decorate the ordinary is eternal. From the courtyard outside, you hear the soft thump of footsteps. Another family member enters, carrying a large jug of water balanced effortlessly on their hip. They pour a steady stream into a basin near the oven, washing their hands before joining in. The floor darkens as droplets fall, releasing a faint coolness into the air. For a moment, everything moves in perfect synchronization. The bread slapping the oven, the bubbling stew, the soft murmur of voices. It feels like music, though no one's singing. Just work done well, rhythmically, instinctively. You realize how communal even small domestic acts are in this world. Cooking isn't solitary, it's social glue. A clay bowl tips slightly near the edge of the hearth, revealing a cluster of dark seeds. Coriander? Maybe. Mesopotamian households loved herbs and aromatics. Coriander, cumin, garlic, and mustard seeds, these flavors have seasoned history for millennia. Historians still argue whether everyday families could afford spices regularly, but traces of them have been found in even modest dwellings. A pinch of luxury, literally. The older woman turns the last flatbread, lifts it from the oven wall, and sets it on a clay platter. The surface crackles faintly as it cools. She brushes it with oil, then sprinkles a few crushed herbs across the top. The smell hits you like a wave of comfort. Simple food done perfectly. You sit quietly near the doorway as the family gathers. The stew is ladled out, the bread passed around. They eat cross-legged on mats, dipping bread into the steaming bowls, talking softly between bites. It's the kind of meal that fills more than hunger. It fills the day's emptiness, the space between effort and rest. For a moment, you imagine joining them. You'd reach for the bread, tear off a piece, taste the tang of smoke and grain. Maybe someone would laugh softly at your awkwardness, and you'd laugh back, your voice blending with theirs. In that moment, time would collapse. You'd be one more person in a kitchen that's existed for 5,000 years, eating the same meal under the same smoky air. The fire crackles low, the last light flickers, and the house breathes again, a sigh of contentment, clay and smoke and quiet satisfaction. You step out of the dim sanctuary and feel the world returning, sound first, then color. The murmur of voices, the shuffle of sandals, and the flicker of daylight filtering through stone courtyards all rush back at once. Outside the sacred core of the temple, the air feels more human, less divine perhaps, but warmer, more alive. This is where ordinary Egyptians come to meet their gods in their own quiet ways. The courtyard is wide and sunlit, framed by thick columns painted in bands of faded color. Pigeons flutter between the beams, scattering a few feathers across the ground. The floor beneath your feet is worn smooth from centuries of footsteps. Farmers, fishermen, potters, mothers with children clinging to their legs, travelers passing through with small gifts in hand. You can almost hear their whispered prayers echoing faintly in the air, as though the stones themselves have learned to listen. A woman stands near a small altar carved with the symbol of Hathor, the goddess of love and music. She has brought a loaf of bread, still warm, and a few lotus petals in a woven basket. Her offering isn't grand, but her movements are careful and reverent. She bows her head and murmurs something you can't quite hear, maybe a wish for her family's health or her son's safe return from the fields. Nearby, a fisherman lays a tiny clay fish beside a shallow dish of water. His skin is darkened from long days under the sun, his hands calloused. He closes his eyes for a brief moment and then simply walks away. The act seems so small, and yet, in its simplicity, it feels complete. In ancient Egypt, religion wasn't something only for priests or kings. It wove itself through daily life, like the Nile through the valley. You didn't have to enter the inner sanctum to feel the divine. You could speak to the gods from your own threshold, whisper to them over your morning bread, or carve their symbols into the lintel above your door. Even here, outside the main halls, smaller shrines cluster along the courtyard's edge. Each belongs to a different god. Isis, protector of mothers; Thoth, lord of wisdom; Bes, the squat, lion-faced guardian of sleep and laughter. Their statues are worn smooth by countless fingers. You see traces of red pigment on one, faint as a blush. Someone must have repainted it long ago, hoping to keep the god's image a little longer. As you walk, you notice offerings scattered everywhere. Loaves of barley bread, bowls of honey, garlands of flowers already wilting in the heat. Even a small jug of beer, left half full, the foam dried to a thin ring around the rim. It's easy to imagine someone sneaking a sip before setting it down. Devotion, after all, doesn't forbid a little thirst. A priest's assistant moves quietly among the altars, collecting items that are starting to spoil. The offerings will later be distributed among the temple workers, just like the food from the inner sanctuary. Nothing is wasted. Even devotion here is practical. Spiritual sustenance becomes physical nourishment. The air smells of incense, but also of people. Sweat, linen, bread baking somewhere beyond the walls. A child tugs at your sleeve, offering a small clay figure shaped like a cat. "For Bastet," she says with a grin. The cat goddess was beloved, a symbol of home and protection. Her statues, often carved from alabaster or bronze, stood in nearly every household. Cats themselves were sacred animals, pampered, fed, and occasionally worshipped more sincerely than most relatives. You buy the figurine for a copper shard and set it gently beside a small altar to Bastet, her ears perked as if listening. The gesture earns a toothy smile from the girl before she darts off toward the next visitor. The people around you seem to move in a rhythm, offering, bowing, whispering, leaving. There's no single grand ceremony now, just dozens of small acts of faith layering atop each other like sediment. Each prayer adds a grain to the invisible weight of devotion that fills this place. You pause beside a man reciting words to a falcon-headed statue of Horus. His voice trembles slightly. His left arm is wrapped in linen, stained with what looks like an herbal salve. You catch enough to understand. He's praying for healing. In ancient Egypt, medicine and magic weren't separate things. A physician might prescribe honey for a wound and a prayer to Sekhmet, the lioness goddess, to guard against infection. Both were essential. To heal the body without the favor of the gods was unthinkable. Somewhere in the courtyard, a scribe reads aloud from a strip of papyrus, a petition to the gods. The paper crackles softly in the breeze. You catch fragments of his words. "Grant me peace in my house. Keep my cattle safe from flood." The tone is measured, polite, like someone writing to a bureaucrat rather than a deity. Egyptians didn't plead with their gods so much as they negotiated with them, reminding them of good deeds, making reasonable requests, offering suitable payment in return. Even in prayer, order ruled. As you wander, you find a quiet corner where the wall has been blackened by candle smoke. Someone has drawn small symbols there in soot and ochre, eyes, ankhs, spirals, perhaps scratched in by those who couldn't afford an offering. Each mark carries meaning: the eye for protection, the ankh for life, the spiral for eternity. Some are fresh, others nearly erased by time, but they all speak the same silent language. I was here. I asked. I hoped. You sit for a moment, feeling the heat of the stone beneath you. The temple hums faintly with activity, a soft chorus of faith continuing all around. It strikes you that this isn't the kind of religion that demands fear. It's gentle, woven into the pulse of living itself. For most Egyptians, the gods weren't distant or cruel. They were neighbors, companions in the daily business of staying alive. There's a story, told quietly among the locals, about a humble worker who once prayed for a god's help after dropping his wages into the Nile. He lit a small lamp and promised to offer 2 fish if the river returned the money. The next morning, a fish flopped onto the shore near his hut. Inside it, the coins. True or not, stories like that endure because they feel right. The gods in Egypt weren't unreachable. They listened, sometimes even answered, especially if you paid your debts with interest. You rise and walk toward the temple gates. A faint breeze moves through the colonnade, fluttering the linen canopies overhead. The sunlight has shifted, afternoon now, and the golden edges of the columns shimmer faintly. People continue to drift in and out, their faces calm, almost sleepy. The temple feels less like a monument and more like a breathing organism, fed by the slow rhythm of faith. Historians still argue whether ordinary Egyptians truly understood the theology behind all these rituals. Did they know the elaborate myths of Osiris and Isis, or the symbolic meanings carved into the walls? Or did they simply follow tradition, doing what their parents and grandparents had done before them, trusting that it worked? Maybe belief didn't need understanding. Maybe it was enough to show up, offer bread, and hope the gods noticed. You glance toward a nearby alcove where a blind man sits cross-legged, plucking a stringed instrument. The melody drifts lazily across the courtyard, slow and haunting, like sunlight rippling on the water. People toss small offerings at his feet, coins, food, a few flowers. In ancient Egypt, even music could be a form of worship. To play for the gods was to speak their language in tones rather than words. As the sound mingles with the smell of incense and the low murmur of prayer, the air takes on a strange calm. You realize how deeply peace and repetition were intertwined here. Every act, no matter how small, was part of maintaining ma'at, that perfect balance between chaos and order. Before you leave, you glance once more toward the heart of the temple, where the sanctuaries sleep behind closed doors. Inside, the priests perform their secret rituals, but out here, the people perform theirs, simple, heartfelt, human. One world mirrors the other. You brush your hand across the cool stone of the wall, feeling its slight grain beneath your fingertips. For a brief second, you think you feel a pulse, a faint vibration running through the stone, like a living thing. Maybe it's the echo of footsteps from 1,000 mornings. Maybe it's something else. Either way, it reminds you that faith, like stone, endures because people keep touching it, again and again, with hope. You step back into the sunlight, the warm air wrapping around you like a shawl. The courtyard fades behind you, but the hush of countless whispered prayers seems to follow, a kind of spiritual hum that lingers long after the incense has burned away. The quiet rhythm of daily devotion gradually fades as the temple prepares for something far grander. You sense it before you see it. The change in the air, the distant beat of drums, the sudden movement of people. The hush of worship transforms into a living, vibrant pulse. Today is no ordinary day. It is festival day, when the gods themselves are invited to leave their hidden chambers and see the sunlight once again. The air feels electric, though no one would use that word yet. The faint scent of incense is replaced by the thick, sweet smoke of burning myrrh and resin. Banners flutter from the temple pylons, painted in bright colors, turquoise, gold, ochre, catching the light like waves of silk. The statues of the gods are being readied for procession, carried out from the inner sanctuaries where they normally slumber. You can feel the hum of anticipation ripple through the crowd,
1,000 murmured prayers tumbling into the warm wind.
You edge closer to the outer gate, where priests and attendants bustle about with a sense of reverent urgency. They move the way bees do, each knowing exactly what to do, even in the chaos. A high priest gives quiet instructions, his voice calm but commanding. The sacred bark, a beautifully crafted boat made of gilded wood, is polished to a mirror shine. It will carry the god statue through the streets and down the Nile so that all may see and celebrate.
The festival could be for any number of gods. In Thebes, it might be the Opet festival for Amun-Ra, when his image travels from Karnak to Luxor Temple. In Memphis, perhaps a celebration for Ptah. Wherever you are, the essence is the same. The god leaves the sanctuary to renew the bond between the divine and the people. In a world where the gods mostly stay unseen, this day is a rare reunion. You feel a gentle nudge as a boy passes you, his arms full of lotus flowers. He's selling them to people in the crowd who want to toss them toward the bark as it passes. You buy one, a pale blue blossom just beginning to open, and tuck it behind your ear. You probably won't survive this heat, you think dryly, but at least you'll look festive doing it.
A group of musicians gathers near the temple entrance. Women with hand drums, men with flutes and sistrums, the sacred rattles used in worship of Hathor. When they begin to play, the sound is hypnotic, a shimmering rhythm of bronze and reed and voice. The beat starts slow, ceremonial, and then rises with the chant of the priests. The sound fills the air until it feels like the whole courtyard vibrates. You can't help but move a little with the rhythm, the vibration tugging at your chest like a heartbeat. The gates open. A hush falls, as if the air itself is holding its breath. The priests emerge first, walking in precise formation. Behind them comes the bark, carried on the shoulders of 20 men. It glitters with gold leaf, the prow carved into the head of a falcon, the symbol of the sun's journey across the sky. Inside, under a canopy of linen, rests the shrine, the god's statue hidden from direct view, but present all the same. The crowd erupts in murmured devotion, voices blending into a low hum of awe. You find yourself whispering too, though you don't even know the words. It's as though being near this procession unlocks some old instinct, to bow, to hope, to connect. Around you, people kneel or raise their arms. Children wave palm fronds, and even the temple cats weave between legs, startled but curious. The procession begins to move, slow and stately. The bark sways slightly with each step, and sunlight flashes on its golden surface. The priests chant hymns that rise and fall like the tide, invoking the god's blessings for fertile fields, calm floods, and protection from disease. Each verse is centuries old, memorized by generations of voices. As you follow along, the procession spills out onto the wide avenue lined with sphinxes. Their stone faces, part lion, part human, seem to watch silently as the god passes by. The road leads to the river, and the closer you get, the stronger the smell of the Nile becomes: mud, reeds, water lilies, and the faint tang of fish. The combination is oddly grounding after all that incense. At the water's edge, another bark awaits, a larger one, carved like a real ship, but decorated in divine splendor. It rocks gently against its moorings, ropes creaking softly. The god's statue will now take to the river, symbolizing the eternal journey of creation, the movement of Ra's solar boat across the heavens. Priests transfer the smaller shrine onto the floating bark with careful ceremony. The crowd presses closer, though the temple guards hold them back with gentle hands. Once the statue is secured, the musicians begin again, their rhythm echoing across the water. Drums thud, flutes trill, and voices rise in unison. You can feel the energy of it in your chest, a sacred joy that isn't loud but deeply steady, like the heartbeat of the land itself. As the bark drifts out onto the Nile, People toss flowers, fruits, even bits of jewelry into the water. The river becomes a mosaic of petals and light. The sun catches on the ripples, turning them to molten gold. You watch the god's vessel glide downstream, shimmering like a dream. Somewhere, a man nearby shouts a blessing. Another begins to dance, his movements wild and joyous, while a group of children splash in the shallows, pretending their clay toys are miniature barks of their own. The whole scene feels ancient and immediate at once, a communion between time, faith, and celebration.
Historians still argue whether these festivals were truly religious or partly political displays, reinforcing the power of priests and pharaohs. But standing here, watching faces light up in the sun, you realize it doesn't matter much. To the people, it's both divine celebration and social heartbeat, a reminder that life, like the Nile, must keep moving. A breeze stirs, carrying the scent of incense and river water back toward the temple. The music softens, fading into the distance as the bark drifts farther downstream. For a while, no one speaks. Even the chatter of the crowd quiets, replaced by the steady lap of waves. When the bark finally vanishes around the bend, the festival shifts into its second act. The solemnity melts into laughter. Stalls appear seemingly from nowhere, selling beer and roasted duck. Jugglers and acrobats perform in the street, their movements echoing the divine procession in miniature. Children chase each other through clouds of dust. You watch it unfold, smiling. Even the gods, it seems, appreciate a good after-party. You accept a cup of cool beer from a friendly merchant, its foam catching the light. He grins and raises his own cup toward the river. "To Amun," he says. You clink cups and take a sip. The beer is thick, yeasty, slightly sour, but refreshing all the same. Egyptians brewed beer daily. It was safer than water and considered a sacred gift from the gods. It's oddly comforting to think that faith and fermentation once went hand in hand. As the sun begins to set, the priests return from the river, their steps slower now, their chants softer. They carry the shrine back into the temple, the light fading behind them. You watch as the doors close once again, sealing the god back into mystery until the next celebration. The day's color drains gently from the world, replaced by the golden dusk. You stand by the Nile a moment longer, watching lanterns float downstream, tiny lights sent out by worshippers as offerings to the river. The sight is mesmerizing, hundreds of flickering points of flame drifting on the dark water, each carrying a wish or prayer. The river, like time itself, accepts them silently. As the last light fades, you realize how deeply this place ties joy to reverence, laughter to faith. In Egypt, worship was not about fear of divine wrath. It was about harmony, gratitude, and rhythm. The gods weren't distant kings demanding obedience. They were companions, as real and necessary as the flood that nourished the crops. You turn back toward the temple, where the final embers of incense rise into the cooling night. The crowd disperses, leaving behind footprints, petals, and echoes of song. The quiet returns, but it feels different now, warmer, fuller. You can still hear the faint echo of drums in your mind, like a heartbeat that lingers long after the festival ends. You exhale softly. For the first time in hours, the temple is still again. The gods have returned to their chambers, the people to their homes, and you to that familiar calm where devotion and sleep begin to blend together. The air inside the embalming house is heavy and still. Even before you step across the threshold, you can smell it. A blend of resin, natron, and the faintly sweet scent of oils that never truly leave the walls. The work done here is both intimate and eternal. It is the art of preservation, the quiet, patient craft of guiding a soul from one world into the next. The Egyptians believed death was not an ending, but a continuation. The body, they thought, was a vessel the soul might need again, and so it must be cared for, protected, and made whole. The process of mummification was not merely technical.
It was sacred theater, a ritual act of devotion that touched both the mortal and divine. You walk into the chamber, where shafts of light slip through narrow vents in the wall. The scene before you is deliberate and rhythmic. Several embalmers move in practiced silence around a linen-wrapped form laid upon a low table of stone. Their tools, simple blades of copper, spoons, and jars, rest neatly beside bowls of fragrant oils. The sound of slow chanting hums like bees in the background as a priest recites verses from the Book of the Dead. One of the embalmers, his head shaved and skin glistening in the heat, works with precise calm. His hands are steadied, his movements graceful. He's not a physician, nor quite a priest, yet he holds both knowledge and reverence. To watch him work is to witness a balance of faith and science, intuition and discipline. He begins by cleansing the body with palm wine and water from the Nile, murmuring prayers as he pours. The washing is symbolic, purifying both the physical remains and the spirit that once lived within. Then, using a hooked instrument, he makes a small incision near the abdomen. Through this, he carefully removes the organs, each one cleaned, anointed, and placed in its own jar. You notice the jars waiting on a nearby table, beautifully carved canopic jars with lids shaped like divine heads, a falcon, a baboon, a jackal, and a man. These represent the 4 sons of Horus, protectors of the liver, lungs, stomach, and intestines. Each organ is preserved with natron, the desert salt that draws out moisture and halts decay, before being sealed into its jar. The heart, however, is left inside the chest. It is the seat of emotion, wisdom, and identity, the part of the soul that would later be weighed against the feather of Ma'at, the goddess of truth. The brain, curiously, holds little significance to the Egyptians. The embalmer removes it by inserting a long metal hook through the nostrils, breaking the thin bone behind the nose, and gently stirring until the brain liquefies. It's then drained out, discarded without ceremony. You shiver at the thought, though the embalmers perform it with serene familiarity. To them, this is not gruesome work, it is sacred duty. Next comes the drying. The body is covered entirely in natron and left to rest for 70 days. The embalmers check the body daily, ensuring no moisture remains. During this time, prayers continue. The deceased is never left alone. You imagine the slow, patient passage of those days. The desert air outside, hot and dry. The chamber inside, filled with the silence of time stretching on. When at last the drying is complete, the body is unwrapped from its natron cocoon. It looks fragile, papery, yet intact. Now begins the process of restoration. Oils and unguents are rubbed into the skin. Cedar, myrrh, and frankincense, their scents rich and warm. The embalmers anoint each limb as if reawakening it, speaking softly as they work. They fill the body with linen and sawdust to restore its shape, sometimes even inserting small amulets between the wrappings. Each amulet carries meaning: the scarab for rebirth, the ankh for life, the eye of Horus for protection. These are not decorations, but spells woven into the fabric of eternity. When the wrapping begins, it is done with care bordering on love. Strips of linen are layered one over another, bound in resin to seal them. The process can take days, sometimes weeks. Priests recite the ritual of the mouth opening, touching the lips of the mummy with sacred tools to restore the senses, to allow the deceased to see, hear, speak, and breathe again in the afterlife. You find yourself breathing more slowly as you watch. There's something strangely soothing about the ritual, the repetition, the order, the rhythm of it all. Nothing is rushed. Each motion, each knot of linen is both an act of craftsmanship and a prayer. The embalmers seem to exist in another kind of time, one that moves in circles instead of lines. When at last the wrapping is complete, the face is covered with a gilded mask. The mask is not meant to hide, but to reveal the idealized image of the soul in divine form. Gold, the flesh of the gods, signifies eternity. For pharaohs, these masks are masterpieces of art. For ordinary people, they are humbler, but no less meaningful, often painted wood or linen coated in plaster. Yet the intention is always the same, to honor the journey beyond.
The mummy is then placed within a coffin, sometimes several, nested like shells, each painted with protective texts and symbols. On the outside, the Book of the Dead is written in hieroglyphs, a map for the spirit to follow through the dangers of the duat, the underworld. You trace the symbols with your eyes: serpents, stars, waves, and gates. Each one holds a story, a spell, a promise. You follow as the embalmers carry the coffin from the chamber into the blinding sun. The light feels shocking after so long indoors. Outside, the family of the deceased waits in silence, their faces solemn but not sorrowful. To them, this is not the end of life, but its continuation in another form.
A priest dressed as Anubis, the jackal-headed god of the dead, leads the procession. His mask gleams black and gold, his steps measured and slow. Behind him, incense burns in thick spirals, the smoke curling upward like a path for the spirit to follow. The coffin is carried on a wooden sled, drawn toward the west, the direction of the setting sun, and thus the realm of the dead.
The desert wind whispers softly, and you can hear the faint rattle of papyrus leaves. The journey to the tomb is both physical and spiritual. The priests chant verses describing the soul's voyage through the duat, past lakes of fire, through halls guarded by serpents, across rivers of darkness. But beyond all these lies the field of reeds, a paradise of sunlight and abundance, a mirror of Egypt itself, perfect and eternal. At last, the procession reaches the tomb. The walls inside are painted with scenes of the deceased's life, plowing fields, embracing family, offering gifts to the gods. The colors are vivid even after centuries. Blues as deep as the Nile, reds like desert clay, gold that still glows faintly in the half-light. These are not mere decorations. They are memories made eternal.
The coffin is lowered into the burial chamber. Around it, offerings are placed: bread, wine, figs, amulets, and small wooden servants, shabti, that will awaken to labor in the afterlife. The priest raises his hands and recites the final blessing, his voice echoing off the stone. You can almost hear the closing words of farewell. May your soul rise with the sun. May your heart be light before the scales of truth. May your name live for millions of years.
The tomb is sealed. Dust settles in the silence. Somewhere beyond the threshold, the Nile flows on, carrying the reflection of stars. Life continues as it always has. Fields to till, children to raise, prayers to whisper at dawn. But beneath the earth, another kind of life begins. For the Egyptians, immortality was not a distant dream, but a carefully constructed reality, a collaboration between gods, people, and the natural world. They didn't fear death as a void, but understood it as transformation. The body sleeps, the soul journeys, and time folds back on itself like the turning of the river. As you leave the tomb and step into the cooling dusk, you feel an unexpected calm. The desert horizon glows orange and violent, the sky vast and soft. You realize that, in a way, the Egyptians never truly died. They simply changed their address. Their names, their prayers, their careful works of stone and linen all whisper the same message. Nothing is ever lost. Everything becomes something else. You look back one last time toward the silent entrance of the tomb. The air is still, the sand smooth, the sky full of stars. Somewhere within, wrapped in quiet and resin and faith, a soul is beginning its next journey. And with that thought, you breathe out slowly. The rhythm of life, death, and rebirth
feels less like mystery and more like music, a melody that never ends, only changes key.
You rise before the first light touches the river. The air still carries the night's coolness, and the only sounds are the faint ripple of the Nile and the whisper of linen robes brushing against stone. Today, you follow the priests, the quiet keepers of Egypt's divine order, as they begin their morning ritual. Priests in ancient Egypt lived lives of discipline and rhythm. To serve the gods, one had to be clean, both in body and spirit. And so, before the temple doors even open, you find yourself standing by the sacred lake, a man-made pool within the temple walls, perfectly still, mirroring the stars that linger above.
One by one, the priests step into the water. They move slowly, reverently, submerging themselves 3 times. The water is cool and smells faintly of lotus. They murmur soft prayers as they wash their faces, their arms, their hands. Each gesture deliberate, symbolic. Purity is not merely hygiene, it is the foundation of connection to the divine. To touch the altar, to speak the God's name, one must first be reborn in cleanliness.
You notice one priest shaving his head and body with a small bronze blade. Every hair must go, no place for impurity to cling. He does this every other day, as part of his ritual maintenance. Even a stray whisker would be considered an offense before the gods. The Egyptians took hygiene seriously long before it became fashionable elsewhere. Soap made from natron and animal fat was a daily staple, and oils perfumed with myrrh kept the skin supple beneath the desert sun. You can't help but think how ironic it is that while the rest of the ancient world may have thought Egypt exotic, its people were basically the inventors of spa culture. Somewhere between the prayers, oils, and scented baths, the priests achieved what modern influencers might call self-care, but make it sacred. After the washing, they dress in fresh white linen, always white, symbolizing purity. The fabric rustles softly as they tie it around their waists. A few apply kohl to their eyes, not for vanity, but protection. The dark line shields against glare and insects, and perhaps against the gaze of evil spirits. As the sun begins to rise, its light paints the temple walls gold. You follow the priests toward the inner sanctuary. Before they enter, they stop once more to offer incense, bowing deeply before the doorway. The high priest steps forward first, carrying a small brazier. The smoke curls upward like an invisible rope, connecting earth and heaven. Inside the temple, the air is cool and shadowed. The thick stone walls hold in a chill that feels almost like secrecy. The priests move with practiced precision, each step measured, each motion part of a rhythm older than memory. The first task of the day? Awaken the god. To the Egyptians, the statue of a god was not a symbol, it was the god, a living, breathing embodiment of divine presence. But even divinity, it seems, enjoyed a little morning ritual. The high priest approaches the inner shrine, which remains hidden behind doors closed since sunset. With hands trembling slightly, he opens them. Within the shrine stands the image of the god, carved in stone and inlaid with gold and lapis lazuli. The priest bows low and begins to speak softly. I awake you, Great One, who rests in silence. I give you breath for another day. He removes the linen wrappings that covered the statue overnight, as if unwrapping a sleeper from a blanket. Then he bathes the statue with water, anoints it with oil, and dresses it in fresh linen robes. Jewelry follows: necklaces, rings, a crown. Finally, he offers food: bread, meat, fruit, and wine. The god, of course, does not physically eat, but the act of offering transfers the food's essence to the divine. Once the god has been nourished, the food becomes Heka, charged with spiritual power, and will later be shared among the priests. Historians still argue whether this daily feeding of the gods was strictly symbolic, or whether the priests truly believed the statues absorbed the food's spirit. Either way, you find the ritual strangely comforting. The act of care, washing, dressing, feeding, feels intimate, like tending to a beloved elder or an honored guest. You notice how quiet it is here. Outside, the city of Thebes might already be stirring, merchants shouting, donkeys braying, children laughing. But inside these walls, time seems to stand still. The only sounds are the low murmur of chants and the faint hiss of incense. As the ceremony continues, another priest fans away flies with a strip of palm frond, ensuring that no impurity disturbs the divine space. A third sprinkles natron water along the floor, purifying the area. The work is repetitive, methodical, almost hypnotic. At one point, the high priest pauses, raising his hand toward the ceiling. His voice deepens as he invokes Maat, the goddess of truth and cosmic order. Everything the Egyptians did in their temples was about maintaining balance between life and death, chaos and harmony, human and divine. Without Maat, the sun would not rise, the Nile would not flood, and life itself would crumble into disorder. You can sense the weight of that belief in every movement. Each gesture, each word is an offering to keep the universe steady for one more day. Then the chanting slows. The priest extinguishes the incense and closes the shrine doors once again. The god has been tended to, and the world can continue turning. Afterward, the priests leave the inner chamber to attend to other duties: record keeping, managing temple estates, instructing novices, and overseeing ritual calendar dates. The temple is not only a house of worship, but a vast institution. Part spiritual center, part economic powerhouse. Temples owned farmland, employed scribes, and managed trade in grain, linen, and perfume. You follow one priest through a courtyard where scribes sit cross-legged with papyrus scrolls. They record offerings, track laborers' rations, and calculate temple revenue. The sound of reeds scratching against parchment mixes with the cooing of pigeons on the roof. It's a reminder that faith and bureaucracy have always gone hand in hand. Later, the priest returns to the sacred lake to bathe again before his midday meal. Purity must be renewed constantly. He eats simply, bread, figs, and beer, and then rests in the shade for a short while. In the afternoon, there are more prayers, more incense, more recitations from sacred texts. It strikes you how cyclical their lives are. Every action, sleep, wash, pray, eat, record, pray again, is part of an unbroken loop. And yet, within that loop, there's peace. Repetition becomes meditation. Purpose hums quietly beneath routine. One of the younger priests, perhaps new to the temple, looks nervous as he prepares offerings. His hands tremble slightly as he pours oil into a small lamp. The older priest beside him whispers something encouraging, and they share a brief human smile. Even in the shadow of gods, a little kindness remains. You watch as evening begins to fall. The final prayers are recited. The god's shrine is closed once more for the night. The priests extinguish the lamps one by one, leaving only the faintest glow from the central brazier. The scent of incense still lingers, sweet, smoky, timeless. As the doors to the temple are sealed until morning, you can almost hear the world exhale. The sun dips low over the Nile, painting the water in shades of bronze and rose. The priests retire to their quarters, silent and serene. Their day has been long, but every act, every washing, every whisper, every flicker of flame has been a thread in the fabric of eternity. And as you step outside, into the cool breath of dusk, you understand something subtle but profound. The Egyptians didn't simply worship their gods, they collaborated with them. Their rituals weren't about fear or submission, but about partnership, a daily act of keeping existence itself in harmony. It's a beautiful thought, really. The universe as a temple, endlessly tended by invisible priests, sweeping away chaos, polishing the stars, and lighting incense for the dawn. And somewhere, in that quiet, you realize Even your own breath feels like part of the ritual. The temple courtyard hums softly with life as you step into it again, this time focusing not on the priests or the grand festivals, but on the quiet, intimate acts of devotion that fill the hours between grand ceremonies. Offerings, small, personal, and meaningful, are everywhere. The air is scented with incense, but also with bread, fruit, and the faint, earthy aroma of lotus flowers. Each object, each gesture, is a language in itself, a wordless conversation with the divine. You wander past a low altar where a farmer has placed a tiny loaf of barley bread, a bowl of honey, and a small jug of beer. He murmurs softly, not for the ears of anyone else, but for the eyes of Hathor, the goddess of love and joy. You notice that he leaves a few seeds beside the offerings. Perhaps they are symbolic, perhaps practical. Either way, it feels like a quiet hope for life and growth, for a harvest that will feed both body and soul. Small statues of the gods stand along the walls, each marked with a different symbol. The ankh, representing life, gleams faintly in the early morning sun. The scarab, symbol of rebirth and renewal, sits next to a tiny offering bowl. The Eye of Horus, painted on a slab of limestone, watches silently. You reach out to touch one, but hesitate. Superstition and respect war gently in your mind. Instead, you close your eyes and feel the textures, imagining the countless hands that have traced these symbols over millennia. Nearby, a woman kneels beside a statue of Bes, the dwarf god who protects households and children. She places a small figurine at his feet, whispering prayers that no one can hear except the deity he represents. Bes was both playful and protective, a reminder that magic and mischief often coexist. Egyptians liked their gods approachable, even relatable. You might not find humor in every pantheon, but Bes could make you smile, or at least feel safe while sleeping. The offerings aren't always physical. A boy has written a simple prayer on a piece of papyrus, rolled it carefully, and tied it with a strip of linen. He places it into a small hollow in the wall. His words ask for strength, for protection, for a little luck in the coming days. Historians still argue whether these written prayers were intended to be read by the gods themselves or functioned more as personal reminders of devotion. Either way, you sense the sincerity behind the gesture, a kind of quiet magic that doesn't require recognition. You notice the rhythmic flicker of lamps along the temple walls. Some are dedicated to specific deities, and the oil burned in them is often perfumed with frankincense, myrrh, or cassia. Lighting a lamp is both practical and symbolic. A source of illumination, yes, but also a beacon of intention. The flame carries the prayer upward, a little bridge of light connecting mortal and divine. In the corners of the courtyard, children play with clay animals, cats, crocodiles, ducks, all miniature offerings of their own. You smile at the thought that even play can be devotional. Every action, if intended with respect, can carry spiritual weight. Even a mislaid toy could serve as a charm. Egyptians believed the ordinary world was suffused with sacred presence. Their homes, fields, and tools all held the potential for connection with the gods. You pass a small altar devoted to Thoth, god of wisdom and writing. On it rests a quill, a jar of ink, and a piece of papyrus with neat hieroglyphs. A young scribe practices copying spells and hymns, his lips moving silently as he shapes the words. Each mark is a prayer in itself, a repetition intended to ensure memory, knowledge, and divine favor. Writing was an act of devotion, a way to keep the gods present in everyday life. Even small, imperfect scribbles could hold immense spiritual power if done with sincerity. The courtyard is dotted with small pools of water, reflecting the morning sun. People dip their fingers in, touching their lips or sprinkling themselves lightly. Water is sacred, a symbol of life and renewal. Even the smallest act, washing hands before an offering, carries significance. You dip your hand into one of the pools, feeling the coolness seep into your skin, as though the temple itself breathes through the water.
You notice a tiny amulet lying forgotten on a ledge, a scarab carved from carnelian. You pick it up and examine it. Scarabs were symbols of regeneration, rolling the sun across the sky like a divine dung beetle, as Egyptians imagined. You chuckle quietly at the thought of celestial insects powering the universe, and the humor, subtle but present, eases the solemnity of the temple. There's something reassuring in that. Belief need not be grim to be serious.
Nearby, a group of women arranges small bundles of flowers around a statue of Isis. Their movement is careful, almost choreographed, a silent dance of devotion. Some flowers are fresh, others have begun to wilt. Historians still argue whether the Egyptians believed the freshness of offerings affected the god's favor, or whether the act itself was what mattered most. Either way, there is beauty in imperfection, a recognition that effort, not perfection, defines devotion. You wander toward a small alcove where a man offers a bit of honey to the god Min, god of fertility and strength. He whispers a hope for children and fields alike, placing a handful of the sticky sweetness into a bowl. The aroma is thick, warm, and comforting. It strikes you that scent is a kind of language, one that speaks directly to memory and emotion, connecting worshippers to both gods and ancestors.
Around the temple walls, you notice countless tiny carvings, hands, eyes, stars, spirals. People have left them for centuries, marking moments of devotion, petition, or gratitude. Some are deep and deliberate, others are shallow scratches, almost accidental. Yet all of them speak the same silent truth. Someone was here, someone cared, someone believed.
The courtyard begins to fill with soft chatter as visitors arrive for mid-morning offerings. You watch as a mother brings a small loaf of bread for her sick child, whispering prayers to Sekhmet, lioness goddess of healing. She sprinkles a little wine on the offering, anointing it with a touch of oil. Her gestures are delicate, practiced, yet tender. This is everyday magic, the uncelebrated, continuous devotion that threads life and eternity together.
You pause to consider the rhythm of it all. There are no grand ceremonies here, no parades, no river processions, just the quiet accumulation of gestures, each small, each significant. Over time, these acts form a tapestry of faith, a living network connecting humans and gods, city and river, stone and sky. It's striking how personal and yet communal this devotion is. Each person acts for themselves and for their community, offering the very best they can spare. A loaf of bread might be tiny, a flower wilting, a whisper lost in the wind, but together, these acts form a chorus that resonates throughout the temple. You imagine the invisible threads connecting all of these actions. The flicker of a lamp here, the placement of a flower there, the scratch of a stylus across papyrus, all intertwining like constellations in the sky. In this web, the divine feels present, intimate, approachable. It's a daily conversation rather than a distant decree, and you realize that this quiet magic sustains more than faith. It sustains the rhythm of life itself. The sun rises higher, and the courtyard begins to hum with the gentle activity of the day. You take a final deep breath, absorbing the smells, the colors, the small miracles happening all around. The temple is alive, not with spectacle, but with devotion. The patient, steady acts of ordinary people seeking connection with something greater than themselves. You step back from the altars, feeling an unexpected lightness. The world outside may be chaotic, noisy, unpredictable, but here, in this courtyard, rhythm and care create their own kind of eternity. And maybe, you think quietly, that's the most sacred magic of all. As the sun dips low behind the desert hills, the temple begins to change once again. The heat of the day softens, and shadows stretch across the sandstone columns.
You find yourself lingering near the outer gates, watching as people depart. Children tugging at their mother's skirts, merchants packing away wares, priests moving quietly to their quarters. The courtyard empties, leaving behind a kind of hushed expectancy. Night is coming, and with it, a different kind of devotion.
You notice the first lanterns being lit. Their flickering light casts long, wavering shadows across the walls, revealing details missed in daylight. Tiny hieroglyphs carved along the bases of columns, faint patterns etched into the stone floors, subtle discolorations marking centuries of touch. Each lantern seems to breathe life into the temple, small flames dancing like attentive spirits. The priests emerge from their quarters, walking softly along the stone pathways. Their white linen robes glow faintly in the lantern light, almost spectral. Night in the temple is not merely a pause in ritual, it is another kind of ceremony entirely. The gods, although housed in their inner sanctums, are believed to remain active during these hours. The priests move as though under their gaze, careful with every sound, every gesture. You follow a group of them toward the sacred lake. The water, now reflecting the first stars, appears almost black, yet it mirrors the heavens with startling clarity. One priest lowers his hand, tracing ripples into the surface. The act is delicate, almost reverent. Water as a medium between worlds, a conduit for prayer and purification. He murmurs words meant to keep the chaos of night at bay, to maintain Ma'at, the divine order that underpins existence. A few worshippers linger quietly in the shadows, performing their own small acts of devotion. One elderly man arranges a row of tiny lamps along the base of a column, offering light to Thoth, god of wisdom. A young woman leaves a handful of lotus petals at the foot of a statue of Isis, the scent faint but potent in the cool evening air. Even in the absence of daylight, devotion finds a way to assert itself, delicate and persistent. You walk past a shrine where a priest is quietly reciting from a scroll. The voice is low, almost indistinguishable from the gentle rustling of night winds. The scroll's words are spells meant to guide the deceased safely through the Duat, the Egyptian underworld, during their nocturnal journey. It's a ritual of care, a protective act not for the living, but for those already departed. You shiver slightly, not out of fear, but from a sense of awe at the continuity of care that stretches across the realms of life and death. As you pause near the central sanctuary, the large doors swing open slightly, and a soft glow spills out. Inside, the high priest moves carefully around the statue of the god, adjusting the robes and checking the offerings left throughout the day. Even in darkness, nothing is neglected. Each act is deliberate, as if to reassure the deity that the order of the world remains intact. You realize that the temple, at night, is like the heartbeat of the city itself, quiet, steady, reliable. You notice one curious detail. The priests sprinkle a fine powder around the inner sanctum. It smells faintly sweet, with hints of myrrh and frankincense, but there is a subtle sharpness too, almost medicinal. This natron mixture serves multiple purposes: purification, protection, and perhaps even a kind of symbolic ward against spiritual impurities. Historians still argue whether the sprinkling was more for ritualistic effect or practical sanitation, but in either case, the act seems to harmonize the space, imbuing it with a sense of vigilance and calm. Outside, the first stars begin to emerge in the deepening indigo sky. Orion rises over the horizon, and you can't help but notice the alignment of some temple walls with particular celestial bodies. The Egyptians believed the heavens reflected divine order, and that the stars themselves carried messages of protection, guidance, and cosmic rhythm. A faint breeze carries the scent of desert dust and distant reeds from the Nile, a reminder that life continues beyond the sacred walls. You walk along the periphery of the temple,
pausing at small altars where visitors have left lanterns, bowls of water, or incense sticks. Each object holds intention, prayers for safety, for health, for clarity in the coming day. The courtyard feels alive in a hushed, meditative way, a stark contrast to the midday bustle. You notice a cat slipping silently between the shadows, its eyes reflecting the lantern's glow. Cats were considered sacred, guardians of the home and temple alike. Even in darkness, their presence reassures that order persists. In a corner, you find a young acolyte practicing the reading of hieroglyphs by lantern light. The flickering illumination casts long, shifting shadows across the papyrus, making each symbol appear as if it were moving. You recognize a few: the Ankh for life, the Jed for stability, the Eye of Horus for protection. He recites the spells slowly, deliberately, not rushing, as if the rhythm of speech itself maintains balance. A few meters away, a priest arranges tiny bowls of honey, oil, and water along the threshold of a shrine. These are small, practical offerings, but their symbolism is powerful. Sustenance, nourishment, and purification all presented together. It occurs to you that the Egyptians understood the night as a time to reinforce harmony, a quiet rehearsal of cosmic order before the city awakens once again.
The deeper you move into the temple complex, the more meditative the atmosphere becomes. The high priest lights a central lamp, and you notice the shadows dancing across the walls. The flickering glow brings hieroglyphs to life, their carved lines seemingly moving in rhythm with the flame. You remember the daytime bustle, the offerings, the festivals, but here, in night's embrace, devotion is intimate, internal, quiet. A small bell rings somewhere down a corridor, its tone low and resonant. It signals the start of a silent vigil, a period of reflection and prayer. You see figures kneeling, heads bowed, hands folded. Even without sound, the energy of devotion is palpable. The temple breathes with these acts, like a living organism, maintaining itself through cycles of attention and care. You notice a subtle repetition in all these rituals: wash, anoint, offer, chant, repeated endlessly, like the turning of the Nile itself. It is rhythmic, hypnotic, and strangely comforting. Even the faintly playful elements, the cat, the flicker of lanterns, the whispering acolyte, create a balance of order and life, echoing the Egyptians' understanding of ma'at. Historians still argue whether nightly rituals were as important as daytime offerings, or if they primarily reinforced the temple's social hierarchy. Yet standing here, enveloped by shadow, light, and incense, you realize the distinction feels irrelevant. The night is as sacred as the day, each act a thread in the continuity of devotion. As you pause in the courtyard one last time, the stars bright overhead and lanterns glowing faintly below, a sense of calm settles over you. The temple is a sanctuary not only for gods, but for the human spirit, a place where ritual, care, and quiet attention maintain a fragile balance. Even as you prepare to leave, you feel the lingering rhythm of the temple's heart, steady and enduring, like the pulse of eternity itself. The next morning, you wake to a softer light spilling across the temple complex, the sun just beginning to cast long, golden shadows over the stone walls. But today, your path takes you to a quieter, more fragrant part of the temple, the sacred gardens. These are spaces of calm reflection, living offerings to the gods, and repositories of sensory devotion that engage sight, smell, and touch in equal measure. You step barefoot onto the cool, damp earth, feeling the difference immediately. The stones of the courtyard are replaced by soft soil and carefully raked pathways. These gardens were not merely decorative. Every plant, every water channel, every stone had purpose. Lotus flowers bloom in shallow pools, their pale blue petals nodding lazily in the morning breeze.
Papyrus stalks sway along small channels of running water, reminding you subtly of the Nile itself. The Egyptians believed that cultivating plants in a sacred context mirrored the cultivation of the soul. Tending a lotus was a prayer, pruning a papyrus was an act of devotion, and watching the gentle rise of water through the irrigation channels was a meditation on life's continuity.
You follow a narrow path lined with small statues of deities, each holding a plant or fruit in symbolic gesture. Bes, the dwarf god, appears again among the flowers, grinning with his eternal mischief. A tiny offering of milk and bread sits at his feet. Nearby, a statue of Hathor gazes serenely at the garden, her ears adorned with lotus garlands. You notice how carefully the flowers are arranged, colors chosen for harmony, height for visual balance, scent for olfactory impact. Even in seemingly random beauty, there is meticulous design. Water flows gently from small stone spouts into shallow pools. The sound is soft, almost hypnotic, a natural accompaniment to the distant chants echoing from the main temple. Egyptians believed water could purify the body and spirit, and in temple gardens it carries a dual role: practical irrigation and symbolic nourishment for the gods. You cup some water in your hands, feeling its coolness seep into your skin. You flick it lightly onto a small offering of bread set for Osiris, imagining that this act of care reaches the divine just as surely as if it were spoken aloud. The gardens are not quiet in the sense of emptiness. Birds flit between papyrus and lotus, their calls punctuating the soft rustle of leaves. Butterflies drift over the pools, their delicate wings catching the sunlight. Priests move among the plants, checking water levels, pruning flowers, and offering small gestures to the gods. Some recite short hymns, their voices low and measured, blending with the natural sounds of the garden in a harmonious tapestry. You pause near a bed of jasmine, inhaling its heady fragrance. Egyptians associated scent with spiritual potency. Myrrh and frankincense were valuable, yes, but even the simplest flower carried meaning. Historians still argue whether certain garden layouts were purely aesthetic or intentionally symbolic. Rows and shapes reflecting constellations, deities, or moral ideals. Standing here, among blossoms and the gentle trickle of water, you sense that the answer is both beauty and devotion, intertwined. Along a shaded path, small altars hold offerings of fruit, bread, and miniature clay animals. You notice children quietly placing little bowls of honey beside the lotus pools, learning from parents that everyday acts, however small, carry spiritual weight. The Egyptians seem to understand instinctively that devotion does not always require grand gestures. Sometimes, the simple act of tending to life itself, watering a plant, arranging a bloom, setting an offering, was enough. You move to a quiet corner, where a fig tree spreads its branches over a small stone bench. A priest sits there, carefully anointing a tiny statue with oil, whispering soft prayers to Thoth. You watch, captivated, as the sunlight catches the droplets of oil, scattering tiny rainbows across the leaves. Even in such mundane motions, there is a sense of sacred rhythm, every action deliberate, measured, respectful. In the distance, you hear the faint tinkling of a sistrum, a ritual rattle, signaling that worship in the inner temple is ongoing. Yet the garden feels separate from the hustle and bustle, a place where gods, humans, and nature coexist in quiet equilibrium. Lotus, papyrus, fig, and date trees are cultivated not only for offerings, but to create an environment of meditation. The fragrance, colors, and sounds were all designed to elevate consciousness and bring worshippers closer to divine presence. You notice how the plants themselves seem to respond to attention. Leaves glisten from dew or from water splashed in ritual. Petals open more fully under soft sunlight. There is a subtle lesson here. Life, like devotion, thrives when cared for gently and consistently. The garden is both metaphor and practice,
a living example of balance and patience. Some offerings are more unusual. A priest places small carved stones shaped like scarabs among the plants, and another arranges tiny figurines of crocodiles and fish. These represent gods, spirits, and protective forces. Quirky as it may seem, this blending of life, symbol, and imagination was a hallmark of Egyptian spirituality. You smile, recalling the miniature clay cats in yesterday's courtyard, proof that even play could be sacred if performed with intent. You wander toward the central water pool, where lotus flowers float like delicate stars. A priest leans over, scattering petals into the water while chanting. The flowers drift slowly, carried by invisible currents, their movement mesmerizing. You crouch, dipping your hand into the pool to feel the chill against your skin, and you notice the interplay of light, shadow, and reflection. For a moment, it feels as if the water itself is alive, a silent mirror to the divine.
Historians still debate the extent to which these gardens were practical versus symbolic. Some argue they served as cool, shaded retreats in a hot climate. Others insist that every plant, every layout, every water channel was imbued with religious meaning. Standing here, you realize it doesn't matter. Both are true. The gardens nourish body, mind, and spirit, weaving daily life into the continuous fabric of devotion.
As the sun climbs higher, casting warmer light across the paths, you take a slow walk along the garden's outer edge. Bees buzz lazily among the flowers, birds flit between papyrus stalks, and the soft murmur of temple activity drifts faintly from the inner halls. Every sensory detail, scent, sound, color, touch, feels like an offering in itself, a small tribute to the balance and beauty that the Egyptians sought in both the visible and invisible world. Before leaving the garden, you pause to take in the scene. Fig and date trees casting patterned shadows, priests tending small offerings, children learning devotion through play, and the subtle hum of life in every corner. This is a space where time slows, where intention and care are tangible, and where the ordinary and the sacred blend seamlessly. And as you step back toward the stone pathways of the main temple, you carry a lingering sense of quiet joy. The fragrance of the garden, the gentle rustle of leaves, the soft lapping of water. It all feels like a secret the Egyptians left behind. A whispered promise that devotion, when expressed through care and attention, is itself a path to eternity. The early morning air is already warm as you return to the temple complex, but today the atmosphere is different. There's a subtle anticipation in the scent of incense and the hum of temple servants moving about. You realize today is not like other days. Today is a festival day. Even in ancient Egypt, festivals were not always loud or chaotic. They were measured, deliberate, rhythmic, and full of purpose. Yet the air itself seems to hum with expectation, like a quiet string vibrating just beneath the surface. You follow the priests as they begin preparations for a procession. Unlike the intimate rituals you have observed before, this is communal, involving musicians, dancers, temple staff, and worshippers from nearby households. The path to the river is lined with small altars and offerings, each placed carefully along the stone and sand to honor the gods as the procession passes. You notice children holding small sistrums, shaking them gently, learning early that music itself carries divine significance. The priests emerge in their ceremonial robes, longer and more elaborately pleated than usual, adorned with gold trim and amulets. Some wear crowns shaped like lotus blooms, symbolizing creation and rebirth. Their movements are deliberate but flowing, a kind of choreography that seems to have been refined over centuries. You can't help but marvel at how structured these rituals are. Nothing is left to chance. The procession begins quietly. Priests lead the way, carrying sacred objects, small statues of gods, bowls of offerings, and ceremonial wands. Behind them follow musicians,
playing flutes, drums, and the soft, mesmerizing rattle of sistrums. The sound fills the air in waves, low and rhythmic, blending with the rustle of robes and sandals on stone. The music is not just entertainment, it is part of the ritual, believed to awaken the gods' presence and please their senses. You tap your foot unconsciously, caught up in the hypnotic cadence.
Worshippers line the pathway, some holding torches, others bearing small offerings. Their faces are calm and attentive, reflecting a reverence that feels almost meditative. Children mimic the movements of priests, learning through observation and imitation that devotion has both structure and freedom. Even the mundane acts, walking, standing, placing an offering, become ritualized, folded seamlessly into a larger, sacred narrative.
The procession pauses at key points along the route. At each station, priests chant softly, sprinkling water and incense while reciting prayers. The god statues are presented to the people, allowing worshippers to see, touch, or offer gifts. Some sprinkle grains of barley or small amounts of wine onto the altars, believing these gestures nourish the divine in both symbolic and spiritual ways. You notice the careful repetition. Every pause, every sprinkle, every chant is repeated with precision, reinforcing rhythm, continuity, and cosmic balance.
Historians still argue about the origins of certain festival rituals. Were they meant primarily to appease the gods, or were they social mechanisms to unify communities and reinforce temple authority? Standing in the middle of the procession, surrounded by music, incense, and offerings, you realize that it's both. Ritual serves the divine and human realms simultaneously, and the beauty lies in how effortlessly they intertwine. The musicians play steadily, their instruments not just audible, but felt. Drums create deep, resonant vibrations that seem to move through the ground itself. Flutes carry airy melodies that rise above, intertwining with the sistrum's metallic rattle. You can almost see the air bending in the rhythm, the temple's walls vibrating in sympathy, as if the very stones are participating in the devotion. As the procession moves closer to the Nile, the priests pause again. The river is wide and shimmering, reflecting the rising sun in a dance of gold and blue. A small barge waits, adorned with flowers and carrying a central deity statue. This is the highlight of the festival, the ritual journey of the god along the river, connecting heaven, temple, and community. You feel a quiet thrill, witnessing a ceremony that has been performed for centuries, unchanged in its rhythm, yet alive in every repetition. You notice small details that make the festival intimate despite its scale. A woman has placed a tiny loaf of bread on the temple steps as a personal offering. A child holds a figurine of a cat, quietly presenting it to a statue of Bastet. Priests nod in recognition, but do not disturb these private gestures. It strikes you that personal devotion and public ritual exist side by side, complementary rather than competing. Along the riverbank, dancers begin moving in slow, flowing patterns, imitating the movement of lotus blossoms, reeds, and water currents. Their robes ripple and sway, creating a living tapestry of motion. You see the play of light and shadow as the dancers turn, the sun glinting off gold trim and painted masks. The choreography is precise, yet the performance feels alive and organic. Every step is part of a story, every gesture a prayer. The barge carrying the deity slowly glides along the river, accompanied by rhythmic drumming and chanting. Offerings are sprinkled into the water as it passes, meant to nourish the god and sustain the balance of the Nile itself. You notice how every action mirrors natural and cosmic rhythms, river flow, sun movement, celestial patterns, and agricultural cycles. The Egyptians understood ritual as a way to align human life with cosmic order. You pause to watch a priest scatter incense into the river's gentle current. The smoke rises,
curling into the sky like invisible threads connecting earth and heaven. You imagine the scent traveling across fields and villages, touching the homes of worshippers far from the temple, binding community and cosmos in a single moment. Historians still debate how literal the Egyptians' belief in the divine sensory experience was, but standing here, you feel it viscerally. The smell, the sound, the motion, all contributing to an almost tangible spiritual presence. The festival continues through the morning, a seamless weave of chant, music, dance, and offering. Each participant, from priest to child, contributes to a living, breathing ritual that both honors the gods and reinforces human harmony. You are struck by how these ceremonies, while elaborate, are never overwhelming. They are immersive yet gentle, complex yet calming, a reminder that devotion can be both structured and joyous. As the barge returns to the temple, the final rituals are performed. The deity is once again placed in its inner sanctum, offerings are stored or consumed, and music fades into soft echoes. You linger a moment longer, letting the rhythm of drums, flutes, and sistrums imprint itself in your memory. Even as the festival ends, the sense of continuity, the ongoing dialogue between human and divine, remains palpable. You step back into the quiet courtyard, now empty but for the gentle flicker of lanterns. The festival may be over, but its energy lingers, a subtle hum that resonates in stone, water, and heart. The Egyptians understood that celebration is not just spectacle, it is repetition, intention, and rhythm, a way to remind both gods and humans that life, order, and devotion are inseparable. As the morning sun fully warms the temple walls, you breathe deeply, absorbing the lingering sense of incense, flowers, and river water. The music, once audible, is now only an echo in memory, yet its cadence remains within you, a gentle heartbeat. You realize that the true beauty of these festivals is not in grand displays, but in the seamless integration of sensory, spiritual, and communal devotion. And with that understanding, you feel a subtle calm settle over you, the kind that comes from witnessing a culture where life, ritual, and eternity are woven together in every gesture, every note, and every ripple of water. After the lingering rhythms of festivals and processions, you find yourself drawn toward a quieter, less obvious part of the temple, the repository of sacred knowledge. Not all devotion in ancient Egypt involved incense, water, or music. Some took place in silence, behind thick stone walls, among scrolls, papyrus rolls, and carefully carved inscriptions. These spaces, often tucked away in temple corners or upper chambers, hold the intellectual pulse of ritual life, a place where words themselves are offerings. You follow a priest into a small, dimly lit room. The air is cooler here, dry, and slightly sweet from centuries of preserved papyrus. Scrolls are stacked on low shelves, some tied neatly with linen strips, others resting in clay jars to protect them from moisture. You notice the deliberate order, texts organized by deity, by type of ritual, and by season. This is a library, but also a sanctuary, a place where knowledge itself becomes sacred. One priest unrolls a papyrus, revealing intricate hieroglyphs accompanied by small illustrations. These are ritual instructions, hymns, and incantations, each word chosen carefully to honor the gods. He reads silently, lips moving, eyes tracing the lines with reverent precision. The act of reading is itself a form of devotion. Every word carries power. Scholars still argue whether the potency of these texts was inherent in the language or in the intent of the reader, but either way, the practice reflects deep respect for the written word. You notice peculiar talismans tucked between scrolls, tiny figures of baboons, scarabs, and snakes. These are not merely decorative, they function as protective charms, ensuring that knowledge remains safe and potent.
Ancient Egyptians often blended practical, symbolic, and magical considerations seamlessly. Even a minor scribal error could require ritual correction, a reminder that precision mattered not just for accuracy, but for maintaining divine harmony.
A young scribe sits cross-legged on the floor, practicing glyphs on fresh papyrus. His strokes are slow, deliberate, echoing the rhythms of earlier rituals. You realize that education here is a form of devotion. Copying a text isn't just literacy, it is participation in a sacred continuum. Each generation of scribes preserves the wisdom of the past while adding subtle nuances of interpretation, creating a living chain of connection to both gods and ancestors. You glance around the room and notice the layered sensory environment. The scent of papyrus mingles with faint traces of incense burned in the inner temple. Sunlight filters through small lattice windows, casting geometric shadows that move with the day. Even the sounds, the scratch of stylus on papyrus, the occasional shuffle of a robe, feel deliberate, part of a rhythm that mirrors the cadence of prayers and offerings elsewhere in the temple. Some scrolls contain practical information, calendars, grain measurements, temple inventories. Others are purely spiritual, hymns, magic spells, lists of deities, and instructions for the care of the divine statues. Every piece, large or small, contributes to the temple's function. Historians still argue about the proportion of practical versus purely religious texts, but standing here, you sense that such distinctions might be artificial. In ancient Egypt, knowledge, devotion, and daily life were inseparable. You notice one curious text, written in a slightly unusual script. Its purpose is obscure, perhaps intentionally so. Some scholars suggest it records esoteric rituals reserved for high priests, secrets meant to maintain hierarchical control. Others argue it's simply a record of older practices, preserved for posterity. You smile at the mystery. Some things, it seems, were meant to remain elusive, a reminder that not all sacred knowledge was meant for every eye. A small shelf holds instructional texts for novices, diagrams of temple layouts, lists of ritual steps, and guides to correct pronunciation. Mispronunciation was believed to compromise the efficacy of a spell, so precision was crucial. You imagine the nervous excitement of a novice priest practicing glyphs by lantern light, aware that even the smallest error could disturb the delicate rhythm of divine service. On another table, a priest carefully lays out illustrations of gods and symbolic motifs. These images are more than decorative, they are didactic, teaching observers the relationships among deities, the symbolic meanings of offerings, and the alignment of celestial cycles with temple rituals. You find yourself tracing the lines with your finger, imagining centuries of worshippers doing the same. Even the act of looking becomes a kind of silent participation, a subtle offering of attention and respect. In the far corner, a few scrolls are sealed, reserved for the high priest. These likely contain the most secret rites and prayers. You sense the gravity of their presence, the quiet authority they hold. The room is filled with layers of history, devotion, and intention, like a river flowing in slow, deliberate currents, unseen but powerful. Even the mundane aspects of this space are sacred. Dust is swept carefully, papyrus is stored to avoid moisture, lamps are tended, and hands are washed before touching any scroll. Purity is required not only for rituals in the outer temple, but also for engagement with knowledge itself. Ancient Egyptians understood that the written word could carry power, and that power could be disrupted by neglect, carelessness, or impurity. You leave the library area slowly, feeling a sense of reverence that persists long after stepping back into the open temple courtyard. Knowledge, you realize, is another form of offering, quiet, patient, and enduring. Every scroll, every glyph, every carefully stored text is a bridge between human intention and divine order, just as offerings, gardens, and music are. Historians still argue about how widely accessible these texts were and whether the secrecy surrounding certain knowledge reinforced power structures more than devotion. Yet, as you walk past the main altar, absorbing the morning light, you feel that the true value lies in continuity, the slow, deliberate preservation of wisdom across generations. This is devotion expressed through study, repetition, and care, and it complements the more visible acts of worship you've observed throughout the temple. And as you step back into the open air, the fragrance of incense and the soft rustle of palm leaves remind you that devotion in ancient Egypt was multifaceted: physical, sensory, intellectual, and spiritual. The temple is not merely a building, nor its rituals only acts of spectacle. They are living, breathing systems of care, rhythm, and continuity. Knowledge is sacred, and in preserving it, the Egyptians preserved the very heart of their culture.
The day has begun to soften into evening, and the temple's rhythm shifts once again. You wander toward a quiet corner of the complex, where the grandeur of ceremonies, music, and festivals fades into the softer cadence of private devotion. Here there are no crowds, no formal processions, only the intimate gestures of individuals seeking a connection with the divine that is personal, reflective, and slow. It's a space where you can almost hear the heartbeat of devotion itself, steady and calm, threading together stone, air, and human intention. You notice an elderly woman kneeling on a woven mat, her hands folded in silent prayer before a small statue of Bastet. A tiny bowl of milk sits before the figurine, a modest offering, yet it carries profound significance. You realize that devotion does not require spectacle. Sometimes, the simplest gestures resonate the most. Even the flicker of a single candle can be enough to bridge the human and divine worlds. Her lips move slightly, whispering words that may be centuries old, prayers passed down orally through generations. Historians still argue whether such personal prayers were meant for the gods themselves or served primarily as a reflection of the worshipper's inner life, but either interpretation seems to hold weight. Nearby, a young man arranges small clay figurines around a lotus-shaped altar. The figures represent protective deities, each positioned with care to guard his household and family. He hums a soft tune, almost inaudible, a quiet rhythm that blends with the distant flow of the Nile and the rustling of the temple's outer trees. The music is personal, a meditation in motion, yet it mirrors the larger, more public rituals that have unfolded earlier. You think of it as a private echo of the grand ceremonies, a reminder that devotion exists both in collective spectacle and individual practice. A priest passes by, offering a small sprinkling of water and incense to the individuals in the courtyard. The gesture is unobtrusive, respectful, and almost tender. Even in the presence of sacred authority, personal devotion retains its intimacy. You realize that the Egyptians had a nuanced understanding of worship. It could be public or private, structured or spontaneous, grand or subtle, yet each form contributed to the temple's living harmony. You pause near a small fountain where children are quietly tossing grains into the water. Their laughter is soft, almost reverent, as they participate in a ritual that is both playful and sacred. Offering even a handful of barley is an act of care, a message sent to the gods and to their own future selves. It's a gentle reminder that devotion does not always demand solemnity. Joy, attention, and intention are equally powerful. Around the courtyard, small altars glow in the fading light. Bowls of fruit, miniature statues, candles, and flowers form a mosaic of human care. You notice a scribe carefully placing a final line of hieroglyphs on a papyrus, closing a day of study with devotion, attention, and precision. Writing, like offering, like music or motion, is a way to maintain connection with the divine. Every action, however ordinary, becomes a thread in a web that stretches across time and space, linking human intention with the eternal.
Historians still debate how much of private devotion was influenced by formal temple authority versus individual creativity. Observing this courtyard, it's easy to see that both coexist naturally. Authority provides structure, continuity, and protection. Individuality brings spontaneity, sincerity, and warmth. Together, they form a complete tapestry of spiritual life, one that is as delicate as the petals of a lotus floating on water, yet as enduring as the sandstone walls that surround you.
As the sun sinks below the horizon, the temple takes on a soft amber glow. Lanterns are lit once more, their flickering light casting gentle shadows across walls, columns, and altars. You hear the soft hum of prayers whispered, the distant splash of water from the sacred pool, the faint rustle of leaves in the evening breeze. Each sound is subtle, yet it creates a meditative rhythm that slows your own breathing and attention. Even the minor noises, the scraping of a sandal, the shifting of a mat, the drop of a grain, feel like part of a vast, deliberate symphony. You notice a tiny offering left beside the threshold, a bowl of honey, a few sprigs of lotus, and a single date. It is unassuming, almost easy to overlook, yet it embodies the quiet devotion that defines these moments. You realize that the day in the temple, with all its ceremonies, music, festivals, gardens, and libraries, is balanced by these private acts. They are the slow pulse that keeps the temple alive after the grandeur fades, ensuring that devotion continues quietly through the night. In this gentle half-light, you reflect on the continuity of Egyptian worship. From the imposing statues to the smallest personal offerings, from the high priests to the youngest children, each action contributes to the rhythm of life and eternity. The attention to detail, the integration of sensory, intellectual, and emotional devotion, and the gentle repetition of meaningful acts create a kind of sacred equilibrium. You are reminded that in this culture, devotion was never only about spectacle. It was about sustained care, mindfulness, and connection. Finally, as stars begin to pierce the deepening indigo sky above the temple, you settle near a quiet fountain. The water reflects the lantern light like scattered diamonds, and the soft scent of incense mingles with night air and the fragrance of lotus petals. Your heartbeat slows, synchronized with the gentle rhythms around you. The day's rituals, festivals, offerings, music, and private devotion leave behind a lingering sense of calm. And now, as you feel the final warmth of the day fade into night, remember that devotion is more than actions. It is attention, intention, and care. Even as you leave the temple in your mind, the quiet magic remains. The small gestures, the whispered prayers, the subtle rhythms, and the gentle weaving of human effort with divine presence. Let this calmness carry you as the night deepens, like a soft current beneath the surface, steady and reassuring, guiding you toward rest. The courtyard is almost empty now. The flicker of lanterns casting long, gentle shadows across stone and sand. The soft, cool night air brushes your skin, carrying faint scents of incense, lotus, and distant water. You breathe slowly, allowing your body to sink deeper into this calm, letting your thoughts drift like petals across a quiet pool. The rhythms of the day, chant, music, offering, study, linger in memory, soft echoes in the mind rather than demands on attention.
Every small gesture you observed, the flick of a sistrum, the placement of a flower, the whisper of a prayer, remains alive in quiet continuity. Even as night deepens, devotion continues, subtle and enduring. The stars above seem to pulse gently, mirrored in pools of water, connecting earth and sky in an unbroken line. You feel a kinship with every worshiper who has moved through these spaces, a chain of care stretching across centuries. Slowly, your muscles release tension. Your thoughts untangle, and a sense of soft warmth spreads through your chest.
You may not see the gods, and you may not hear every prayer, but their presence is felt in the deliberate, gentle cadence of human devotion. This is the sacred rhythm of the temple, patient, persistent, unhurried. You sink further into comfort, imagining lanterns, lotus petals, and whispered prayers around you, a protective, calming cocoon.
Now, your breath matches the soft pulse of the temple itself. Allow yourself to drift, carried by the gentle, persistent magic of care and intention. Let the quiet, enduring devotion of ancient Egypt guide you toward peaceful rest. Sleep softly, calmly, and know that you are part of a long, continuous chain of attention, wonder, and connection. End of script. Sweet dreams.